This presentation is the history of education in America and how it led to the Common Core. The fact of the matter is that our country was founded upon religion. And so if you don't want to believe that, then you're probably not going to like this video, but it is a fact, and that is a fundamental part of this presentation. And I just wanted to be upfront with you. Until the printing press and the Reformation, there really was no education. There were no books to read. Martin Luther, the founder of the Reformation, said, "I would advise no one to send his child where the Holy Scriptures are not supreme. Every institution that does not unceasingly pursue the study of God's Word becomes corrupt. I greatly fear that the schools, unless they teach the Holy Scriptures diligently and impress them on the young students, are wide gates to hell." And the 1960s is when we took out the Bible in prayer, and the school systems have increasingly become corrupt. The Pilgrims, tired of being told what could and could not be taught in church, and concerned for the spiritual welfare of their children, sacrificed everything to come to the New World where their children could freely learn to read and obey God's Word. However, sin is everywhere, and not all parents were diligently teaching their children. Therefore, the need for this law. Massachusetts School Law, 1642. For as much as the good education of children is of singular behoof and benefit to any commonwealth, and whereas many parents and masters are too indulgent and negligent of their duty in that kind, it is therefore ordered that the select men of every town, in the several precincts and quarters where they dwell, shall have a vigilant eye over their brethren and neighbors, to see, first, that none of them shall suffer so much barbarism in any of their families, as is not to endeavor to teach by themselves or others their children and their apprentices in so much learning as may enable them perfectly to read the English tongue and the knowledge of the capital laws. Once the printing press had been invented, the Bible was originally printed in Latin because the priests didn't want the common person to be able to read the Bible, because then they would know that they were being tricked into having to pay more than they needed to have relatives sent to heaven and whatnot. So the priests did not want the average person to know what the Bible really said, and that's kind of the thought behind America's first public education law of 1647. It being one chief project of the old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of Scriptures as in former time, keeping them in an unknown tongue, so that by the latter times, blah, 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 people could become more corrupt. Ben Franklin reminded Thomas Paine, if men are so wicked with religion, what would they be without it? Back in the good old days, there was only one test, the college entrance exam. Once you passed this, you could go on with your life. These are a few of the founding fathers who entered college at an early age. Charles Carroll, age 10, first senator from Maryland, last signer to die. Benjamin Rush, graduated from Princeton at the age of 14. He was a doctor, a writer, a humanitarian, and founded Dickinson College in Pennsylvania. Fisher Ames studied abroad at 12. He was a Federalist and a statesman. America continued to progress and grow. As the West was being explored, our forefathers wanted to remain true to the purpose of the Pilgrims. They knew that they never wanted to repeat the darkness of Europe, such as the Crusades and the Inquisition. As the First Amendment was written, so were the laws of the Northwest Ordinance, such as religion, morality, and knowledge, being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. Schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Eventually, Wyoming was settled and becoming a state. Here is our original law concerning education, Wyoming State Statute 21-9-102. All schools and colleges in this state are supported in any manner by public funds shall give instruction in the essentials of the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the State of Wyoming, including the study of and devotion to American institution and ideals, and no student shall receive a high school diploma, associate degree, or baccalaureate degree without satisfactorily passing an examination on the principles of the Constitution of the United States and the State of Wyoming. The instruction shall be given for at least 3 years in kindergarten through grade 8 and for 1 year each in the secondary and college grades. 21-9-103. The penalty for failure to carry out the requirements of Wyoming State Statute 21-9-102, willful failure on the part of any school or college administrator or instructor to carry out the requirements of WS 21-9-102 shall be sufficient cause for the removal of such person from his position. Up to this point, we can see that education in America was like a three-legged stool based on religion, morality, and knowledge. As stated earlier, the old deluder Satan, to keep men from the knowledge of the Scriptures, was at work. Here's a timeline of how education in America became corrupt. After the Civil War, schools shift from primarily a parental role to a government role. And that stumped me because when I think of the progressive era, I think of like Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s. But when you think about it, trains were going during the Civil War, so the Industrial Revolution was going. And when you have the Industrial Revolution, you have workers, you have unions, and therefore you have socialism. The Wisconsin Teachers Association asserts that children are the property of the state. 1905, Andrew Carnegie develops the Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which was a promoter of socialistic and global education. 1919, the Institute of International Education was established for the purposes of international peace, funded by Carnegie and led by John Dewey, a known socialist. 1922, Oregon makes it mandatory that any child between the ages of 8 and 16 go to a government school. Bye-bye private schools. 1934, Willard Givens, an NEA, National Education Association, executive secretary, wrote, The major function of school is the social orientation of the individual. Notice it has nothing to do with academics. It must seek to give him an understanding of the transition to a new social order. In 1942, the Journal of the NEA, the National Education Association, had an article stating that a world government would need an educational branch, a world currency, a world police force, and a world Bill of Rights and Duties. In 1946, UNESCO is created. UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Each member nation is told, you have a duty to see to it that nothing in its curriculum is contrary to UNESCO's aims. 1947, UNESCO states, task for the media division is to promote the growth of a common outlook shared by all nations and cultures, to help the emergence of a single world culture. In the 1960s, prayer and the Bible are removed from government schools. 1973, the authors of the Humanist Manifesto II wrote, we deplore the division of humankind on a nationalistic grounds. We have reached a turning point in human history where the best option is to transcend the limits of a national sovereignty and to move toward the building of a world community. In 1991, the U.S. Coalition for Education for All, and I emphasize that because that is a key phrase to anything tied to the UN, for all. That is why you hear President Obama currently pushing for preschool for all. They held a conference, and the honorary chair was Barbara Bush. The keynote address was entitled Education for a New World Order. That speech was not given by Mrs. Bush, however. 2006, the Moscow Declaration is officially adopted by the G8, the United States, the UK, Russia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. This commits these countries to cooperate in education at all levels in the 21st century. This also includes the World Bank, UNESCO, and the UN. Nikita Khrushchev said, "You Americans are so gullible. Now you won't accept communism outright, but we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and find you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you'll fall like overripe fruit into our hands, just like a frog in a boiling pot." To sum up so far, we can directly tie Common Core to the United Nations, and we know that it happened gradually, just like the previous slide showed, a frog in a boiling pot. The timeline for Wyoming is kind of interesting. Just like every other state, in 2009, we had the American Recovery Act, also known as a stimulus package, passed, and inside of it was hidden the Common Core via Race to the Top grants. Although the standards were not fully completed, in order to get the grant, you had to promise to adopt the Common Core standards. So they adopted the standards without even knowing what they were or what was in them or anything. Also, the standards were not written by teachers like you would expect, or educators or childhood development experts. We don't really know who wrote them. We know that David Coleman is behind them. He's also behind the updating of the ACT and the SAT. They are trademarked by Achieve Inc. We know that Bill Gates and Pearson Publishing are pushing these standards and that they will serve to make millions off of the standards. In 2010, former Superintendent of Public Instruction Jim McBride applied for but did not receive Race to the Top money. He also sent the superintendents across Wyoming a memo that was basically saying, "Hey everybody, I got a personal phone call from Arnie Duncan, and we've got this new program coming down the pike. Get ready, it's going to be great." In 2012 and 2010, the State Board of Education adopted the standards both times, and there's an article out there entitled "Wyoming is Proof That the Standards Are Not State-Led," and I believe the Washington Post published that article. So that's kind of wacky that we adopted them twice. So let's think back. We said education is a three-legged stool. Religion, morality, and knowledge. Well, we know there's no more religion, and without religion there's no morality, and knowledge has become emotionally charged rather than fact-based. So we are maybe dealing with a half a leg of a stool. Sources used in this presentation: 4 Centuries of American Education by David Barton, Wallbuilder Press, 2004. A Common Core for a Global Community, Barrett Kujos, a Lighthouse Trails publication. A Brief History of Education, American Education, and that's online. And the Wyoming timeline came directly from the Wyoming Department of Education. Roger Scruton, a philosopher, said, "The human individual is the single most important obstacle that all bureaucratic systems must overcome, and which all ideologies must destroy. For the things of the spirit, the unfolding of a single soul, defies immeasurability. Governmental systems and their like, of course, thrive on measurable data. It's their fuel. They can't survive without it. But a person is a spiritual reality, a union of heaven and earth, in time and yet destined. Therefore, I don't think this will work because we are human beings."